Credit card debt is bankrupting Australians. Let's have a look. Good evening everyone, Florian Heise here and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I have my stein of coffee and I thought we'd have a look at this article about credit card debt and Australians having to declare bankruptcy. Now, debt collection is a business that surely does well during difficult economic times. If anyone knows of a listed company on the stock exchange that focuses on this, just drop it in the comments. Do your own research, not financial advice, but I'd want to look at it. So, debt collectors are bankrupting Australians over small credit card debts. For Kim Forrest and her husband, money has always been tight, but they've managed and until recently believed they were on track for retirement. The Forrests had a mortgage and several other debts, but it was a $9,600 credit card debt that threatened to undo it all. Well, there you go. I mean, a lot of this is probably just lack of financial understanding or what people are actually signing when they're signing these contracts. Just let me know in the comments, how many of you have gotten rid of your credit cards just entirely? I've still got them. I only use them for convenience, just so the government can easily track me all the time. Although I may switch to cash, but nonetheless. So in March, Miss Forrest said she received letters from organizations offering to assist the couple with their bankruptcy. The word bankruptcy was news to her. I just rang them and I said, "What's going on? What's this bankruptcy about?" she said. And they said, "Well, you better ring Lion Finance." Ms. Forrest learned the couple's only asset, their home, could be put in the hands of a trustee unless they came up with thousands of dollars in 21 days. Kim and Steve Forrest, now 55, have been together since they were teenagers. They'd raised their 5 children in public housing just outside Newcastle, while Miss Forrest worked as a chef and her husband drove trucks. "We've never had any money. We're happy without money because we've got each other. It's never ever about money," she said. Well, in some ways that's probably a very sensible way to live. If you get too attached to material things, when you lose it, that can be the end of a relationship and it can really shake you a lot. So there's some value in that statement. They survived the collapse of their small transport business in the 90s and bought their modest home when they were in their 40s. "This was our very first home. It's just amazing, this home. We love it. It's home," Miss Forrest said. And it looks very nice. It's a beautiful home. About 5 years ago, they bought a bed and a washing machine using a credit card with an interest-free period. They continued to use the card for several years. When the interest-free period expired, Miss Forrest said they began paying an interest rate of nearly 30%. Wow, why didn't she flip it to another card? This is the problem. I think this really has to do with people not understanding finance or just banking or money or anything. Their financial knowledge is just terrible. When she was injured and forced to drop out of the workforce, managing their finances became a struggle. Along with their mortgage, there were bills and other ongoing direct debits, including their car finance. They were churning through the one wage they had coming in. It's very, very tough. I mean, we had 2 wages coming in for years, Miss Forrest said. Now it's just Stephen. He's the sole breadwinner, which is pretty hard. See, that's kind of the problem. That's another part of the problem here that isn't really brought up, is that we're in a situation now where you have to have 2 people earning to live a certain quality of life. So if you make, suddenly if you go from 2 jobs to only 1 person working, you end up in this. You're in struggle street. It's hard to make ends meet because your quality of life adjusts. But if you start off with only 1 person working and you only keep that 1 person working, anything the other person earns is a bonus. Or if you lose your job, you can both look for work in dire needs. Then that's kind of the advantage. But it means it's a lot harder to live the type of life that you want and to make ends meet. You just got to cut stuff out. And I know in the homeschooling community, we know there are a lot of families that, because usually it's the mother that's at home educating the children, there are a lot of families that are just, scraping by on 1 income, and it makes it a lot tougher. But in some ways, it's a lot much more rewarding. So back to the article, as they battled to keep up, their repayments to the credit card debt became irregular and eventually stopped. Oh, there you go, there's the problem. In May 2018, the credit card companies sold the debt to collector line finance, a common practice in the banking sector. Well, yes. Debt collectors pay less than the debt is worth for the chance to chase down the entire sum, while the bank gets part of the loan paid out rather than write off the full amount or waiting years to recoup payments. I met a gentleman who I was looking at getting into business with who had a history in debt collection, and it was interesting the stories he told me of all the sob stories he'd get from people. Once the debt collector took over the couple's debt, Mr. Forrest recommenced payments at $50 a week. See, I've tried to use debt collectors to chase money for me, and it hasn't really worked very well. Because one particular restaurant on the Gold Coast, who I should have got him to sign a personal guarantee. I should have, would have, could have. But I can now share that experience with everyone else. So if you're designing a restaurant as an architect for a couple, make sure you get a personal guarantee, because they may be using several company names. But 15 grand for that lesson isn't too bad, is it? So back in September 2018, Line Finance, owned by the publicly listed Collection House Limited, took the first steps in the legal process to recover the debt. In court, the debt collector claimed Stephen owed more than $11,000. Well, there you go. There you go. So it is publicly listed. It seems a bit malice to me, but I might look into them, see how their profits are going. That would be interesting. So Australians can be bankrupted over small debts. Well, yes, they can. A lot of people don't realise that. You could lose your home over a credit card debt. In Australia, an individual can be sued for bankruptcy for an unpaid debt of as little as $5,000. Last year, consumer advocates became increasingly alarmed by the number of clients taken to court over relatively small debts by one company in particular, Line Finance. So, this is also a strategy. You threaten to take them to court, and then it gets really serious, and a lot of people will get, terrified and will respond accordingly. That's a strategy in business. They decided to do some research, analyzing court lists over the past 4 years. Their data, released exclusively to the ABC, backed up their suspicions. Line Finance stands out as the debt collector using bankruptcy proceedings so much more frequently than any other debt collector in the market that it's absolutely astonishing. Financial Rights Legal Centre's Karen Cox said. When it comes to the number of bankruptcy cases filed in the past year, Line Finance was not far behind the ATO. Well, there you go. The ATO is the number one. You can't beat the tax department. Even if you try, you can't beat the tax department in their own game. But while the ATO halved the number of people it sued for bankruptcy from 1215 in the 2015-2016 financial period to 543 last financial year, Line Finance increased its cases from 182 to 512 people in the same period. Well, what does that tell you about how it's all going? Whereas most debt collectors have been using bankruptcy proceedings less and less, Line Finance has been a growing user. The number of bankruptcies are just going through the roof, Ms. Cox says. Maybe they've hired their own internal legal team to make it easier. That's just an assumption. So who's suing for bankruptcy? So here we go. You've got the ATO. They've shot down. Line Finance, American Express. These colours are terrible. Body corporates. That's another thing. If you're in your body corporate and they go you. Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. Where's that? That's there. Then you've got CCC Finance Solutions number 3 Proprietary Limited, and then the major 4 banks are down the bottom. Well, obviously because the major 4 are on selling. They're on selling. So these guys are buying it all up and then going to court. Ms. Cox said bankruptcy would normally only be used if the debtor had an asset like a house. Well, yeah. Yep. Line Finance declared the ABC's request for an interview, but in a statement from its parent company, Collection House Limited, said it made every effort to avoid legal action. We encourage customers to engage with us so we can discuss and assess their financial circumstances and avoid the legal proceedings, it said. The company would not comment on individual cases, but said its approach was different for vulnerable customers and those assessed as having the capacity yet an unwillingness to engage with us to meet their financial obligations. So, there you go. Read the case of the NT politician whose $5,900 debt sent him bankrupt. I might read that another time. Bankruptcy should be a last resort. Once an individual is made bankrupt, their assets are taken over by a trustee and sold to pay off their debts. The trustee also charges the debtor tens of thousands of dollars. Well, we're seeing that with the recent Perth bullion burrs, where they've gone into liquidation by the ATO, and the trustee is making money off the process, which frankly they should have. They need to go through it and sort it all out. That's a business just like any other. It's just a sad situation to be in. Unfortunately for that case, it looks like everyone is going to be able to get access to their property stored in the safe deposit box. It's a good outcome. So bankruptcy proceedings should be used as a last resort because the impact on the debtor of bankruptcy proceedings is profound, Ms. Cox said. They will not be able to travel overseas without the permission of the trustee. In some cases, their employment may be limited, and in some occupations, you're not allowed to continue as a bankrupt. Well, yeah, as an architect, you can't bankrupt yourself. You can't use the title anymore. If you were a director of a business, you can't do it anymore. So it has significant limitations. In Stevens and Kim's case, their home would be sold by the trustee to pay off their credit card debt. You can't explain how frightening that is, to know that they can have something taken away like their house. Then it's embarrassing. You work hard, and at our age, we'd never be able to start again. Lion Finance said its focus was always on helping customers rehabilitate their finances, enabling them to get back on the road to financial freedom. As well as Lion Finance, Collection House Limited owns legal practice CLH Lawyer, which prosecutes its bankruptcy claims. Well, there you go. There you go. That's exactly why. I was right there, wasn't it? They had their own legal team, or they own another company. I mean, in this case, why didn't they just refinance their home and chuck the money on there? Not financial advice, but why didn't they consolidate all their debt onto their home? If there was a capital increase, pay a lower rate. Sure, it'll take longer, but rather than paying off a car and paying off a credit card, you just pile all those payments onto your home loan. Not financial advice. Do your own research. Talk to a professional, not a YouTube head. But that seems like the smart solution. Maybe they couldn't do it. But I mean, that's one way. I would suggest if your home goes up in equity, and you've got all these other debts, to try and consolidate it, get rid of it. Can work, but not with value going down. Anyway, the company adds costs during the process, which can triple the amount owed by debtors within months. Yeah, that's the problem. A debt of $5,000 by the time you get to creditors petition can easily be $10,000 to $15,000, with the addition of interest and legal fees, Ms. Cox said. In 2017, Collection House's half-year report described how it was tightening up its legal processes and taking a firmer but fair position with customers who refused to meet their obligations. Put simply, it was going to start suing more people for bankruptcy. According to the company, the benefits of this tactic were that it significantly increases the number of accounts that will be actioned, encourages customers to take obligations and contracts seriously. The tactic worked to recover Kim and Steve's debt, but the couple say the experience felt far from fair. I've heard of blokes with a credit card debt and their wages are garnished, Mr. Forrest said. Why didn't that happen? Why did it go straight to bankruptcy? Well, I mean, because that's the process to go through before. They have no moral code. Over the past few years, the ABC has spoken to 22 people across Australia who've been sued for bankruptcy by Lion Finance. The people the ABC spoke to described the company as aggressive, difficult to negotiate with, and determined to litigate. Some had lost their homes. Others borrowed tens of thousands of dollars from family or friends to stay afloat. Almost everyone was too ashamed to speak publicly. NT parliamentarian Jeff Collins was not. A former commercial barrister, union representative and firefighter, Mr. Collins was used to having a powerful voice. Although he has had financial trouble before, Nothing prepared him for his encounter with Lion Finance. They have no moral code, Mr. Collins said. His story goes like many others. A marriage breakdown, coupled with spiraling debt, and a credit card he failed to keep on top of. I was earning good money, but I was also paying back a lot of debt, he said. He defaulted on his credit card when he ran up $5,900, and Bankwest sold the debt to Lion Finance in March 2014. Nearly 2 years later, after failed repayment negotiations, Lion Finance took him to court, which ordered $100 a fortnight be taken from his wages. He was then elected to the Northern Territory Parliament in August 2016. The company was told of his new circumstances. 7 weeks later, in October the same year, he recommenced his payment, this time making regular deposits into their account. I received no correspondence, no communication, no telephone calls, Mr. Collins said. Then I was served with a bankruptcy notice in August 2017, which came as a complete surprise because I've been paying the installment amount, he said. Mr. Collins successfully challenged the bankruptcy in court and has since paid off his debt, which with added interest and fees came to nearly $13,000. But the experience has left him determined to break the cone of silence many others felt in the same position. I don't consider myself particularly vulnerable. I've earned good money, Mr. Collins said. That must be a lot more difficult for other people when you've got people like Lion Finance pursuing you and making your life a misery. Well, it showed you they went him for bankruptcy when it was chucked out of court. Obviously, he won the challenge. It just makes everything so much harder to try and get your life back on the rails. Lion Finance said it was confident in its procedures and practices in relation to the two cases featured in this story. It is a matter of public record that neither of these individuals were made bankrupt by Lion Finance, its statement read. So beg, borrow, or steal. Consumer finance groups want an urgent overhaul of Australia's laws to lift the minimum amount for suing from bankruptcy from $5,000 to $50,000 to stop companies like Lion Finance using the courts to push vulnerable people. Well, personally, I don't like that because, I wanted to sue someone for bankruptcy for only $15,000, and that's a lot of money. So, you got to think about this from the small business perspective as well. Guys, $5,000 is a lot. Well, still decent coin. You can't scoff at $5,000, but $50,000, that'll affect a whole lot of small business people, I'd say. What do you think, guys? If someone is being completely just standoffish, intransigent, isn't communicating at all, what would you do? So, when you look at the amount of credit people are given without even blinking, setting it at $5,000 is just ridiculously low, Ms. Cox said. She said part of the problem was credit being offered without proper checks to make sure a customer could afford the debt, particularly when retailers offer cards with interest-only periods. Quite often, the limit on the credit card is thousands and thousands of dollars more than what you require to make the purchase, Ms. Cox said. And then there are strong incentives and marketing sent out to encourage those people to take out the remaining limit. That's definitely part of the problem, and bankruptcy shouldn't be part of the solution. Mr. Collins said he thought a more reasonable threshold would be $20,000. How about $10,000? $10,000, so we're not allowed to spend more than that in cash. How about you make it at $10,000? He also wants more funding for community legal services and an alternative means of mediation to deal with amounts between $5,000 and $20,000. The bankruptcy proceedings are intimidation, Mr. Collins said. Well, yeah, he's probably right there. It's about trying to force you to go ahead and beg, borrow, steal, to get the money to pay them upfront rather than come to a reasonable agreement about an installment plan. In mid-July, after seeking help from Financial Rights Legal Centre and the Ombudsman, Kim and Stephen Forrest reached a deal with Lion Finance. Lion Finance wanted the couple to pay $17,500 to settle the debt, but Ms. Forrest asked for more information about the extra costs. After that, Lion agreed to settle for the original $11,500 amount ordered by the court. The family borrowed the money from a peer-to-peer loan provider to clear their debt, and last week the court matter was dropped. But the family say they face a new fight to clean up Mr. Forrest's credit score. Why do you want to borrow money? I mean, it just takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your marriage. It's heartbreaking, really, he said. Well, yeah, it is. And while the spectre of bankruptcy no longer hangs over his head, Mr. Forrest cannot spend as much time with his family as he'd like. He'll keep driving until the debt's paid. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I thought I'd lost everything over 10 grand. It's just stupid, Mr. Forrest said. They're ruthless. I've never dealt with anyone like them, and never again. Well, yeah. So guys, what do you think about all of this? I mean, there's a human aspect of it. It comes down to, fundamentally, lack of understanding of financial education, I'd say. You know, and sure, they're going hard with bankruptcy, but I mean, they've got a legal firm internally, so they would just, it'd be so easy for them to submit that paperwork. It would be easier. Here's a bet. I bet it would be easier for them to put the paperwork in and just send it to court than to deal with people. What do you think about that? I think that would be easier for them to go through that painful process, the paperwork process, than the painful process of negotiating and dealing with people. That's what I think. So, you know, it looks like we're going to see more and more of this. People are being bankrupted over amounts as small as 5 grand. Consumer advocates are alarmed by the number of clients with small debts taken to court by Line Finance. And they filed 512 bankruptcy claims, just shy of the 543 filed by the ATO. So, yeah, people need to understand more what's going on. They need more education in finance, more education with regards to managing debt and not paying the bloody minimum on these things. Or they should just not get credit cards. They, you know, if you have a credit card, get rid of it, however you can. You know, just ditch it. Ditch it. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow. Take care.